It has been roughly 1 year since I purchased my first ever OnePlus phone, which is the OnePlus 7 Pro. Since then, they've released all sorts of fun things like the 7T, the 8, the 8 Pro, on and on and on. I have stuck with the OnePlus 7 Pro for several different reasons. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you a 1 year update, sort of a review, but a year in, a really long-term review of what I think of this phone. The killer feature on this phone, even 1 year later, is still this enormous 6.67 inch screen. It runs at 1440 by 3120 and 90 hertz. This was my first high refresh rate screen on a phone that I'd ever used, and it's one of those things that you can't really show on screen, but trust me when I tell you, it's just absolutely buttery smooth. It's one of those things that when you go back to a 60 hertz panel, nothing feels quite as good versus something that's higher than 60. Personally, 90 hertz is great. 120 is a little bit better, but you start getting that diminishing returns. I think 90 hertz is a good sweet spot for not killing your battery, but also giving you that lovely buttery smoothness. Something else you may notice about this phone is that there is no notch, there is no cutout, there is no hole punch, there's nothing of the sort. It is uninterrupted screen, which is fantastic because I hate notches. I would rather have a bezel than a notch or a cutout. They're annoying, they get in the way, they make watching videos honestly a worse experience. The way that they got around having this hole punch is with this nifty little pop-up camera. Whenever you switch to the camera, you get a little pop-up, and it has this nice little, let's see if you can hear the motor. I don't know if that's gonna be audible at all, but we're gonna try. It's almost a satisfying little motor. And a year in, no problem at all. This thing opens and closes just as quickly a year in as it did the day I got it. No signs of any sort of breaking down. I haven't even heard of anybody having issues with that pop-up mechanism. Another cool thing that pop-up does, if you have it expanded and you were to say drop your phone, it will automatically retract and give you a message that says free fall detected. It goes ahead and closes that up for you to make sure nothing there gets damaged. On the backside, you have 3 different cameras. It is a triple camera setup. You have a 48 megapixel standard camera. You have an 8 megapixel telephoto, which is 3x zoom, optical zoom. And you have a 16 megapixel ultra wide 17 millimeter. Looking at that camera, I'm really happy with it. I know that a lot of people talked about it being a mid-range camera, whatever. I disagree. I think this thing takes really, really good pictures. This is my chameleon ducky. Took this picture just the other day. Look at the detail here. The color reproduction is good. The dynamic range is good. The natural bokeh here is great. This is not a portrait mode shot. This is just a picture I took on auto. Here's a picture I took of a pretty cool looking dragonfly next to my koi pond. Again, similar kind of thing going on here. Really, really good. It's good clarity, good dynamic range. The bokeh fall off is or I should say the focus fall off is very natural. And the ability to focus on a subject like this at this close range is very, very good as well. Here is a turtle that we encountered on a hike not that long ago. Another picture sample here with the primary camera. This shot was taken with the telephoto of a cool looking storm system that was rolling in, and I think it does a pretty decent job. I mean, look, are you going to lose some of that clarity, some of that detail using a lower megapixel sensor? Yeah, absolutely. But does it do a pretty good job? Yeah, this is still a pretty awesome picture. And last but not least, here is a shot taken with the ultra wide. Same deal here. It is not a 48 megapixel sensor, so you lose a little bit when you start really punching in. But I mean, are you going to sit here and tell me that this is not a cool looking picture? That this is not a totally adequate camera? Here's one of the only samples I have of the portrait camera because I don't take a lot of pictures of myself, but totally serviceable. We'll zoom in on my dog Hopper instead of on myself. But it's, look, it's a perfectly usable portrait camera. This is something where your mileage may vary. This is the 256 gigabyte version, and a year in, I'm using 22% of my storage. I don't keep a lot of stuff on my phone. I use Google Photos. I don't keep a ton of games on my phone, a ton of videos. I don't really use the storage, so 256 has been totally fine. I could have obviously done with a whole lot less. As for the other specs, this is the Snapdragon 855. Mine did come with 8 gigs of RAM, which continues to be just like the 256 storage, more than enough. I can go into my multitasking here and scroll back to whatever the last thing I had open, which was YouTube dashboard, and it doesn't have to reload. It's there in RAM. There's Twitter, no reload there either. 8 gigs of RAM is totally sufficient. In fact, it's probably even more than I needed as well. One of my favorite things about this phone is the content viewing experience. Usually I have this case on it, which has a kickstand, which makes it the ability to just set it down and watch a YouTube video or whatever. Pretty darn simple. Big, beautiful screen, and it does have stereo speakers. It has one bottom firing, and then they have an amplified earpiece up there, which they somehow managed to squeeze up in that tiny little bezel. There is, in fact, a speaker up in there, and they still sound pretty good. I was a huge fan of the Pixel 2 and the Pixel 3 for having, their front-facing stereo speakers, and this is right there with them in terms of being a really good set of stereo speakers. So it's no big secret that I was somewhat critical of Sony when they announced. Pretty good. The under-display fingerprint reader is just as fast now as it's ever been. No issues there at all. It doesn't ever really miss. It's a great fingerprint sensor. The fast charging still feels absurdly fast. The ability for me to forget to plug this thing in overnight, wake up the next morning, realize I've got 30% battery from the previous day, plug it into that bright orange charging cable, and know that in a handful of minutes I'm going to have an 80% charge. I can basically eat breakfast and my phone is charged. That's still an awesome thing. The only thing that I really did to this phone is I'm not using the default launcher. The OnePlus launcher is fine. I'm a fan of the what's called Eevee launcher. I really like the ability to just swipe down and start typing to do a search or to pull up a particular app, whatever. I like their news feed to the side as well. That's pretty neat. Other than that, I've kept this thing pretty much bone stock. There's not been any experimentation really with something like Gcam. I haven't really had a need to. Their built-in camera software is solid. Battery life has been absolutely rock solid as well. It gets me through a full day with no real issues. It's a 4,000 milliamp hour battery, and as I said, running the Snapdragon 855. No problem getting me through a full day. For those wondering how the 855 is holding up a year later, well, let's do something here. Let's do a little experiment. Here's YouTube. We're going to go to multitasking. We're going to split screen. How about Relay Pro, which is my Reddit app? We're going to go ahead and have a video playing up top, which I will kill the volume on. And I'll be scrolling through Reddit. No problem. Let's just pick on a random thing. Load that up. That's a picture. Let's go to some comments or something. No problem there. For all these people that seem to think that the Snapdragon 855, just because there's an 865 and an 865 Plus on the market, suddenly the 855 is going to suck. It doesn't. It still is fine. Unless you're a big benchmarker and you want your phone to have the biggest number when you run a benchmark, don't worry about the 855. It's going to be totally sufficient. In fact, you could probably go back several generations and still be just fine on today's Android. Are you going to run Call of Duty Mobile on the highest settings at 60 frames a second? No, probably not, but this thing can run PUBG Mobile at, they've got it running at 90 hertz, which requires a 90 FPS. So guys, that is my long rambling list of thoughts about the OnePlus 7 Pro. It can be had now for quite a bit cheaper online. So if you're looking at a kind of a budget phone now and you've been looking at the OnePlus 7 Pro, you can take it from me. I think it's a good buy. Android 11 is coming to this phone probably very quickly. It got Android 10 right there with the Pixel phones. OnePlus is awesome about updates. OnePlus software is almost bone stock Android, and the only couple of little adjustments that they make are actually really good adjustments. I'd love to know how many of you guys are rocking OnePlus 7 Pros in the comments, what you guys think about them, how many of you guys were looking at purchasing the OnePlus 7 Pro. Maybe you've found a good deal out there. I'd love to know in the comments. So I'll see you on the next video, and until next time, stay nerdy, my friends. If you enjoy my content, please consider becoming a Scary If Literal member. You'll get access to a whole bunch of emoticons to use with live streams and a shout out on an upcoming video. Thanks as always for your continued support.